All right, hello, welcome back. We are in Photoshop still, and now we're going to work on how we work on our layers. We're going to work on our selection tools, and I'm going to show you lots of different ways that we're going to cut things out in Photoshop. And we today are going to make a sandwich. Yes, sandwich. And we're going to layer up all of our ingredients and create a sandwich. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've downloaded the sandwich image file folder that I'm going to need for this activity. And I have this right here, and it also goes into my downloads. And if you're on a Mac, if you just double click or click on your folder, you'll get your images that you're going to need for this activity. If you are on a Windows, you just need to extract or unzip your folder in order to access these images. So first and foremost, I'm going to start with my plate, which is, if you'll notice, is a .psd is my extension on this. So that means it's going to open up directly in Photoshop. And I can either double click or just drag it to the Photoshop window, which is my preference. Now you'll notice it's a very small file, and that's on purpose. And I'm going to hit Command or Control-0 on my keyboard in order to make my canvas here, my plate image, full size. When it comes in, it's going to start as a background image and it's going to be locked. I'm going to go ahead and unlock that to create it as an actual layer that can be manipulated. And I'm going to rename my layer. I'm going to double click on my layer 0 and I'm going to call this plate. Then I'm going to click off to lock that in. Now, I am not in any way going to change my plate. So I'm going to come up here to the top of my layers panel and I'm going to lock that layer down so that I can't accidentally erase it or paint on it or do any of those kind of silly things that I don't want to mess up. So make sure that you start by locking in your plate. Now, I'm going to go back to my images folder and I'm just simply going to drag my slice of bread and drop it. You'll see the green plus sign onto my plate. And that's going to be the foundation of my bread. And it's going to come in this transform mode, okay? It's got this blue X on it. I can still move it. I can still change its size and kind of reposition it as I want. And I'm going to fit it to my plate because I want to make sure that my bread fits on my plate in a nice, even way. When I'm ready to go, I have two options. I can use the check mark up here at the top of my options bar, which says Commit Transform. Or as you see, it says enter, and you can hit enter on your keyboard to lock it down. And that's my personal preference. When you drag an item in like I did, the image is going to come in as a smart image, okay? And what I would need to do, or a smart object, excuse me, and I would want to convert that into a rasterized layer in order so that I can manipulate it. Now, let me just show you. I'm going to make my thumbnail a little bigger here. You can see that that little symbol in the corner tells me that that is a smart object image, so that I know if I want to erase something, and I'll show you, it won't let me. It's going to tell me that I need to rasterize it and it will no longer be a smart object. Smart objects are something where I can add filters and adjustment layers and things to them, and it won't affect or it won't destroy the original image. It keeps it from being a non-destructive image. But because I want to remove the background on my piece of bread here, I'm going to need to destroy the image a little bit in order to fix it. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say rasterize layer. So now that my image is rasterized, I'm going to start by cutting it out. So first and foremost, we have to make sure that we select our edges of our bread. So we have a couple of different tools that we can use. We have the lasso tool, which lets us draw a selection at our free will that we can use, but that just seems a little complicated. So I'm going to get rid of, these are called the marching ants, or I call them dancing ants. I'm going to deselect, which is Command or Control D on your keyboard. And instead, we're going to use something a little simpler. I've got three tools that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the object selection tool, the quick select tool, and the magic wand tool. Okay, I'm going to start with the quick selection tool. What the quick select does is the computer is smart enough to recognize that there is a color difference between the edge of this bread and the background of the white. So with this tool, you can increase the size of the tool by using your change up here, which is the size. Or you can change the hardness. For this, we're going to leave our hardness at 100. The other way you can do this is you can use the brackets, the left and right brackets on your keyboard, which I find to be a much more effective use of my time. It's a lot slower to have to go up and change it and then check again and then change it. So I like using my brackets. But all we're going to do is make sure that we have our quick select add to selection turned on, and we're going to click inside of our bread. And if you'll notice, I didn't even get to the edge and the computer is already grabbing that edge. And I'm going to move down my bread and I'm not ever going past the edge. And it's just going to grab the edge, and the computer is smart enough to recognize that there's a color shift. And I got there and it recognized the rest of it. Now, if I go off in any way and I get that plus mark, I can get my circle. If you see that, if I get my circle outside, it's going to start grabbing the white, and I don't want that. But I've messed up a little, so I'm going to take my brush here and I'm going to scale it down, and I've switched to my minus. And then I'm going to kind of detract, again, kind of getting right up on that edge. I might go into it a little bit more, go back to my plus, and then I'm going to try again, and I'm going to get a little closer to make sure. Now, if you just mess up completely and you don't want to try to fix it, you can deselect, Command D, and just start again. Now, when I do this, I can go much faster because I've been doing this for a long time. And there's my selection. Now, I have a lot of different ways I can remove the backgrounds. Right now, what is selected is what I'm working on. This is where I can change things. So I'm going to go to my brush tool so you can see I can paint just inside this area. I can erase just inside this area, and anything outside of what's selected isn't affected right now. So that is a lot of versatility and a lot of ability to help us modify set selections without adjusting other selections. So I can do some adjustments with this, and I can maybe turn up just my brightness in that selection without affecting other things. So there's lots of choices and lots of versatility that selections have for us. But for today, we want to focus on getting rid of our backgrounds. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get my bread selected again because I accidentally deselected it. And then we're going to cut it out. Now, if I were to just hit the backspace or the delete key, it's going to delete my bread. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to undo very quickly, edit, undo, clear, or Control Z or Command Z. That's your best friend. Or you can use your history, which is right here, and you can go backwards in your history. But so what I'm going to do is I need to reverse my selection. So I'm going to decide to go up to the select menu, and I'm going to say inverse. And inverse is just a fancy way for saying we're going to flip it. So now if you watch my edge, and I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see. Right now the only thing that's got dancing ants is my bread. But if I go to select and inverse, now my dancing ants exist to the edge of the bread. So now when I hit backspace, the white disappears and not the bread. So I'm going to deselect, Command D, or under the select menu, deselect. But if you look at my edges here, they look real rough and it doesn't look smooth. And I want to make sure it looks the least photoshopped as possible. Now, I understand that this is a highly pixelated image. I did that on purpose. Everything I do is on purpose. So I just want you to get this practice down. So we're going to clean up the edge of our brush, of our bread, using an eraser brush. So I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change my hardness from 100 to about 85. And I'm going to change the size of my brush sometimes as I go, and I'm going to zoom in so you guys can really see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to get a soft edge, and I'm just going to try to clear up some of these harsh lines. And there's a little bit of white sometimes around this edge where the computer doesn't get everything. So see, there's a little pixel of white right there, and I don't want those. So I'm just going to go around and I'm going to clean up the edge of my brush. Now, I want you to do this as well, but what I don't want is I don't want you to remove all of the crust. We are not going to remove our crust. Crust is healthy for us. We want all of our crust on our sandwich, and we're just going to go around the edge all the way from start to finish, cleaning up the edge of our sandwich here. Now we're going to pretend like I did the whole thing and you guys are just going to roll with me, but can you see the difference between the left side and the right side? See how just something like a real quick paintbrush or eraser brush is going to help us clean it up. Now, I may need to go smaller if I wanted to get in this little nook here, and that's okay. We're going to just scale our brushes down, which is why I like those bracket keys. So there's my bread, easy peasy. So now we're going to continue growing, and I'm going to show you another technique, and we're going to do the lettuce. So I'm going to drag my lettuce in. I got to really scale this up to get it to fit on my bread because the lettuce, that's important to get our leafy greens. And we're going to hit, again, enter on our keyboard to lock this in. So this time we're going to use the object selection tool. We're going to use the object selection tool. And for this, what we're going to do is we're just going to drag a box around our lettuce and we're going to let the computer figure it out. When you drag, it's going to do some thinking here, and that's completely okay. And then what it's going to do is it's going to figure out, once it's done thinking, it's going to figure out where it thinks the edges. And there it is. It's done a pretty decent job. It's not great. It missed some spots here. And it's also got some dark spots that I don't want included, which is part of the shadow that I don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into something called the quick mask mode. We're going to hit Q on our keyboard in order to enter this mode. And now up here at the layers, you're going to see it says quick mask mode. So I know I'm in quick mask mode and my layer says quick mask mode so that I can see that it's red. The quick mask mode lets me adjust my selection. It lets me adjust my selection. So I can do two things. I can erase and I can paint to add into my selection. So I'm going to move over into my eraser and I want you to see what happens. Please make sure that your colors here are set to the standard. If they're not, let's say this is some other shade of color, you're going to get gray, which means it's going to be translucent paint, and we don't want that. We want it to be solid 100% opaque. So you can click this down right here to restore the defaults, or just hit D on your keyboard to restore the colors to the black foreground and the white background color. So what I'm going to do is I want to add to this red, which is what's not selected. I know that gets complicated, but roll with me. So I'm going to choose my paintbrush and I'm going to zoom in on this kind of area. And I want this area right here to be painted red as well. Okay. So I'm going to choose a brush that's about 85% hardness, because I don't want a super soft edge, because if you have soft lettuce, you need to put that back because that means it's growing mold. And we're just going to clean up the edge and we're going to get rid of this dark shadow. And then I've got this white that the computer missed. So I'm going to clean up and grab in here and grab that white. And I'm just going to go around my selection, painting off. And sometimes I go back and forth into Q, out of Q and into Q, quick mask mode. So I can just make sure that I'm getting what I need to get and that I'm not missing anything. And I'm going to keep working my way around my lettuce, kind of cleaning up this edge and getting rid. And sometimes, again, I'm going to get a smaller brush to get some of those dark spots that I don't want. Now, that whole little thing, I've got white still showing and I don't want that. This whole section to me is just kind of dark. So I'm just going to cut that whole section out and soften that little nubby up because I don't need that. Nubby is not a real word, I know, but y'all can roll with me. And I'm just going to keep cleaning up the edge of my bread or my lettuce here. Maybe it's butter lettuce. I don't know. Bread lettuce. Is that a real thing? And I'm going to keep cleaning. Now I'm going very quickly. I would expect you guys to use a little bit more precision. This is just me teaching and demonstrating, but I want to make sure that your edges are nice and clean and you've really gotten some good clean edges here and you've gotten rid of some of this dark grossness that you shouldn't have on lettuce. It just shouldn't be there. If you've got that on your lettuce, you need to throw that lettuce away. That's not good lettuce. It can upset your belly. And when we're all said and done, I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see. I'm going to hit 0 or Q on my keyboard to go back out. This time, I'm going to rasterize my layer before I continue. This time, instead of erasing, I'm going to add what's called a layer style. So we want to keep what's selected, which is just that middle, and I want to hide everything else. So I'm going to hit add a layer mask. I didn't need to inverse because I'm hiding everything that isn't selected. And you'll see there's my selection. That's what's left. And the nice thing is I can change this if I want to. I can reselect and mask if I need to, and I can adjust some things in here. I can also delete it if I want to get rid of it, and my background's still there for me to work with, which is really convenient. I'm going to get my selection tool and I'm just going to rearrange this a little. I might transform, which is Control or Command T. Maybe I rotate it a little and just make it a little bigger, get myself some more leafy greens on my sandwich here. And when I've got it kind of the way I want it, I'm going to leave it there. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lock these layers so that I don't mess them up as I'm adding into other things. So the next technique we're going to do is we're going to add the bacon. And And I'm going to drag that up so we can see. And I'm going to get this again. It's where I want it. I'm going to rasterize my layer so that I can manipulate it. I might transform it a little and blow up my bacon because most people like a lot of bacon. I'm not one of them. I'm not a fan. We're going to come over here and this time we're going to use the magic wand tool. And the magic wand tool, instead of picking a whole item, the magic wand tool selects all of one related color. So in this design, the one that's related is white. But you'll notice that it's not getting all of it because not all of these white sections touch each other. So I'm going to have to come up here and I'm going to say add to selection. So now there's a little plus sign. Everybody see my plus sign? So now when I click, I'm going to add to my selection. The other way you can do it is if you don't want to have to change that button, which is my preferred method, I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to get the exact same thing. And now that way I don't have to keep moving up and down. I like keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to keep teaching them to you as we go through. So I'm going to, once again, I'm just going to backspace my white here and get rid of it. And then later, just like we did with the bread and just like we did with the lettuce, I'm going to expect you to clean up those edges. Okay. I'm going to add my tomato last. If you're like me, I love tomato. I always have tomatoes in the house. And I want you to decide what method are you going to use to do this tomato. You decide. No right or wrong answer on this one. I want you to use the technique that you liked the best out of these three. Okay, for me, I'm just going to use the quick select tool real quick, just so we can move on. I'm going to inverse my selection and I'm going to backspace and then deselect. Normally, I would take the time because that edge is really rough. I would normally take the time to clean this up, but just for our purposes of this video, I'm going to leave it looking a little rough. Now, I'm going to unlock my layers here. And the thing that I'd like you to notice is everything looks very flat. So I'm going to hide everything but my bread, and we're going to just mess with the bread for a few minutes. I want my bread to look very realistic, as much as a pixelated piece of bread in a Photoshop project can. I want to kind of make this look like it's actually sitting on the plate. So we're going to talk about layer styles again. Remember how we talked about those layer styles? We're going to add a layer style to our bread. So I want it to look like it has some depth and some realism. And y'all, I just couldn't take those bad edges. I had to fix them. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to add a drop shadow. We're going to double click and we're going to come down and we're going to add a drop shadow. And I'm going to pull this window out so that you can see my bread change as I mess with things. I like my shadows to change every time I go in. I don't leave the default. So I want to think about if this is a piece of bread, I don't want the shadow super far because then it looks like my bread's floating. I want to think about what shadow would a piece of bread actually make. I also don't want a super fuzzy shadow because then it's going to look like it's floating as well. So I want a somewhat firm edge with just a hint of softness. And then I'm going to leave the spread at 0 because I don't need it to be spread out. I think, where it's at is perfectly fine. And I'm going to change my opacity to about 50%. And I'm going to leave it at black and leave it on multiply. And then I'm going to say, okay. I'm going to add my lettuce back and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a drop shadow. Now, lettuce should not put out as much of a drop shadow as a piece of bread. So I'm going to pull my drop shadow down to about 2 because it's thin. It shouldn't make much of a shadow. I'm going to do the same thing with my bacon. I'm going to add a little drop shadow, but this time it might be a little thicker than my lettuce. So maybe it's going to get like a 3. And I can maybe move pieces around as I'm working on stuff. Now, the thing about bacon is bacon, when you cook it, looks kind of see-through. So I'm going to come up here, and right now it's completely opaque, which means it cannot be seen through at all. And I want it to look just a little see-through-y, just a little. So like 90, 91, 92%, because when you cook bacon, it looks a little see-through. Then I'm going to turn my tomato on and add another drop shadow. If you're like me, when I cut tomatoes, I love a tomato. My tomatoes are thick. I like a lot of tomato when I'm talking about a tomato. So I'm going to come in here and add a lot of like a bigger shadow, like that kind of matches my bread more, like a 6. Like a 6 or a 7. And then I'm going to say, okay. And I'm going to get everything. So now if I kind of pull back, it's starting to look like it's got some depth. That's good, right? All right. Now I need some condiments. I need condiments on my sandwich. I like mustard or mayonnaise. It's up to you what you want to use, but we're going to add some condiments and we're going to come and add a new layer. Please make sure that you add a new layer. This is really important because let's say you don't add a new layer and you're going to take a brush and you're going to blow your brush up because you're going to squirt some mayonnaise on here. We'll do mayonnaise first. I'm going to squirt some mayonnaise on here. Now, let's say I mess up and I want to erase. What's happened is I drew on my tomato layer, so now I've erased my tomato, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo what I just did, and I'm going to make a new layer. And I'm going to take my paintbrush, B for brush, and I'm just going to squirt some mayonnaise on here. If you like mustard instead, you can come over here and change over to a mustardy yellow color. And I'm just going to squirt some mustard on my page. You know, it's up to you what kind of squirting style you like. Now that does not look realistic at all. Not at all. So I want to fix it. I want to change it. So I'm going to come over and add another layer style and I'm going to double click. This time I'm going to go to Bevel and Emboss. See how it already looks better? But I'm going to smooth out my mustard because I want it to look nice and thick like it would come out. I might change my size just a little because I don't want it to look too fake. You know, and I can kind of change the depth here, and I'm just going to manipulate this until it looks about right. And you want it to look kind of like mustard would look. You also have some different techniques. You have what's called an outer bevel or an inner bevel, which is the one we're going to do. And I'm going to move down to a pillow. Pillow looks a little more realistic to me. So it kind of gets that look that I'm kind of looking for, is that soft, billowy, that is just squirted out before you've smashed the bread on top of it. And I'm going to say, okay. Now it's looking a little more realistic. So when we build a sandwich, unless you're eating an open face sandwich, you always want to put another piece of bread on your sandwich. But rather than us putting this uncut out piece of bread already, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. No, not at all. That is just a silly waste of our time. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my slice of bread layer that I've already got, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to scroll down. And I have an option here that's called duplicate layer, right there, duplicate layer. Now it's also Command J on your keyboard, which is what I prefer, is Command J. And I'm going to make this top bread. And I'm going to say, okay. And so now I've got two pieces of bread, but it's at the bottom and I got to move it up. So I'm going to drag this layer up. And this is called stacking order. And I'm going to drag it up so it's on top of my mustard. Now, I have never made a sandwich in my entire life, not my entire life, that is ever lined up completely perfect with the bread underneath. So I'm going to transform this. This is again under Edit, Free Transform, or Command T. And I'm just going to rotate that bad boy just a little so that I can see the rest of my sandwich. And I'm going to say, okay. Now, I like all of my bread to be toasted. That's just a quirk of me. I like some burnt bread. I like everything a little charred. So we're going to come over and use a tool over here called the dodge and the burn. And I'm going to show you what both of these do, but we're just going to use the burn for today. The dodge tool brightens whatever layer you're on. So you can highlight and brighten up all the pixels in an area like a sweeping pattern that you would do for a brush by using the dodge tool. Now, instead, we're going to use the opposite. That's the burn tool. Take a wild guess what it does. It burns the color. So yes, it's going to darken them up. So all I'm going to do is I'm sweeping and letting go as I move down, because if I don't let go, I sometimes don't get to see the colors. And I just want to start by creating myself some char, like some grill marks, like it's been griddled in my George Foreman or something. And I'm just kind of creating some char on my grill here, some grill marks, if you will. And you want these to look kind of even. You don't want to go crazy. If you go too far, it's going to start looking fake. And that's about right. And that is how I make a sandwich in Photoshop. Doesn't look too bad, I don't think, especially because I did it pretty quick. For you, now that you've got your sandwich built, I want you to go out and find two additional images on Google Images. Try to find something that's either medium or high resolution that you can work with, something that's from above like the sandwich is. So you don't want to get something that's the wrong angle. And I want you to find two things: cookies, bring some ants to your party, cut some ants out on here, maybe a fork, maybe some chips or some pasta salad, something fun to add to it. And when you're all done, you're going to stop, you're going to file, you're going to save as, You're going to do last name, first name, period, and you're going to call this the sandwich. I was trying to write my name again. And then we're going to save it as a PSD or a Photoshop file so that I can give you a grade. Hope this was a great lesson. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.